Right now there are two types of gardeners. Those that are quietly setting themselves up for massive harvests, and those that don't realise that they're already falling behind. Now, I'm not saying that your seeds should already be in the ground. I'm talking about preparing all the other things that create success later. Now, there's a couple of mistakes which I see a lot of gardeners making every single year, and the thing is, many of them don't realise they're making these mistakes until it's too late. I'm going to go over what those are in a moment. Now, one of the most important things to get right before the growing season commences, which I think is a bit underrated at times, is getting your beds ready for planting. And I'm talking about different things here. I'm talking about adding things like compost, chicken manure pellets, a sprinkling of bloodfish and bone and things like that before you start planting in them, so you can incorporate some nutrients into the beds so that your plants grow nice and happily and give you a good crop. You can also incorporate well-rotted manures as well into your beds, and this will help massively. But just be careful with weed seeds, because some manures, especially horse manure, can contain a lot of weed seeds, so it probably is a good idea to make sure it's well aged first, or even composted actually, to kill them weed seeds off. But yeah, adding lots of organic matter into your beds before you're planting them is crucial for getting some good harvest later on, especially if you've been growing in them beds for quite a few years already. The plants that you're growing in them are going to take nutrients out of the soil, and you need to replace the nutrients that have been lost, not only from growing in them though, but also just leaching. Over time, with rain, the nutrients naturally drain out of the soil, so you also need to compensate for that as well. Add things to the soil before you plant in them. But you'll also want to make sure that there's no weeds in there, especially if you live in a milder region. We live in the UK, which is quite well known for mild winters. We get a lot of these hardy weeds growing through the winter, and just last week I went in here and removed quite a few weeds. So get the soil weed free, clear any of them crops that remain from last year. Maybe you've still got some crops which you've not cleared yet, clear them away and give the soil a nice rake. Make sure it's nice and clear and ready for planting, which for the most part I've done here now, and all I need to do is add a bit of compost and add some chicken manure pellets here, and we should be ready for planting. And bed preparation, in my opinion, it's your bread and butter really. Whether you're growing in the open ground or in raised beds, make sure your beds are well prepared, ready for planting. Make sure they're nicely worked, plenty of organic matter added to them before you're planting them, and this will increase your chances of having a successful growing season. Now, a good job for getting done in February before the growing season really kicks off is getting your seeds organised. Go through them and figure out what you've got and what you need to order as well, and those that you need to order, get them ordered, because the rush in the spring can be, it can be quite busy. Everybody's trying to get seeds all at once, and popular brands can sell out quite quickly. So to avoid this, get ahead of the game and start ordering these in February before everybody else does in the springtime. So order what you need, but also go through any of the old seeds that are expired and discard of them as well. Just have a really good sort through your seeds, and then you'll be ready to start sowing them later on, and you won't be rushing around, scrambling, trying to find what seeds you need and trying to order last minute what seeds you haven't got. And whilst on the topic of organising your seeds, you can actually get some early seeds sown as well. But whilst you can sow quite a lot of seeds early on and give yourself a head start, that brings me on to the mistakes which a lot of people make. Now, the first mistake which a lot of gardeners make when starting seeds early to try and get a head start is sowing the wrong things early. Now, yes, there's plenty of things you can sow early, like peppers, aubergines, onions, hardier crops like your brassicas and your lettuce leaves, and just to name a few. But there are quite a few things which are better suited for sowing later on, around April, May time, and it's things like courgettes, sweet corn, beans, squashes, pumpkins, things like that, which grow really, really fast. But starting these in January, February, March, it's just too early for them, and you're going to end up with massive plants before your average last frost date, whilst there's still a risk of frost, and as a result you're going to end up with leggy plants that are weak, pot bound. It's better to wait until later on for these crops, because they'll actually grow better than the ones that you try to start early. So sometimes it's good starting things early, certain things will do well, but certain things won't. And another mistake which a lot of gardeners make is not giving their early sown seeds enough light. Things like tomatoes and stuff like that that are started at home can really struggle when light levels are low. At this time of year, there's not much natural light coming through your window at home, so plants can become very leggy. Tomato plants are very well known for becoming stretched and leggy if they haven't got enough light, and if severe, this can in turn stunt your plants or even make them die off completely. If you are starting the seeds early, make sure you give them enough natural light. Maybe the hardier crops like your brassicas and your lettuce and stuff like that, start them off in a greenhouse, because they can germinate in quite cool temperatures, and this greenhouse gets lots of natural light, you know, as much daylight as we get at this time of year. But if you're growing them on a windowsill at home, you will get some sunlight, but it's going to be limited because it's just one window. I mean, maybe you have a conservatory, maybe you have a really big window in your front room at home, maybe you have a south-facing windowsill that gets lots of light. In those situations, you know, it should be okay. You can buy some grow lights as well, which will help massively. That's another thing you can do if you're starting seeds early. I'd rather my early started tomato plants get enough light than have the heat. You know, just a normal room temperature at home should suffice for tomato plants. But if you're not giving them enough light, you know, that's a game changer. Light could be the difference between killing your tomato plants and your tomato plants thriving. Now, the one thing which you're absolutely going to want to do before the growing season commences and before you start planting a lot of your crops, if you have a greenhouse or a polytunnel, if you don't, this doesn't apply to you of course, but if you do, you're going to want to get in there and give it a good clean before the spring arrives. February is the perfect time to start doing this. I cleaned my greenhouses just last week. All I did was I got a bucket, filled it up with water from my water butts, put a splash of J's fluid in there. I just used a garden brush here, made sure it was clean first of course, dipped it in the bucket and just scrubbed the glass like that. I also had a sponge as well which I used, but algae can be a real nuisance on glass and also on polytunnel plastics. The whole point of these structures is letting the sunlight in and then capturing the heat from that sunlight and stopping it from escaping. If the sunlight can't get through the glass and warm the greenhouse up, there's not really much point doing it. Not to mention diseases as well. There's lots of diseases that can overwinter in the mild environment of a greenhouse and a polytunnel, blight being one of them, and that's something you don't really want to have problems with. So giving your greenhouse a good clean is crucial to reduce the risk of this happening the following season. And whilst on the topic of cleaning, there's another job which is really important to get done before the growing season starts. And this is one that I need to do actually. I might have cleaned the greenhouses, but I've not cleaned my garden tools just yet. This is something I'm going to do this month in February before the growing season, because you know, they can get very dirty very quickly. And of course, cleaning your garden tools is going to drastically reduce your risk of having problems with diseases such as blight, especially if you had problems with disease last year. If you were pruning diseased material with secateurs, you're definitely going to want to give those a clean, because you don't want to be spreading disease to this year's crops. So yeah, give them a good clean, sterilise them if you can, use J's fluid, white wine vinegar, even containers as well. Get your seed trays and your containers cleaned before the growing season starts as well. I actually need to do mine as well. Yeah, but I'm going to be doing those in February because, again, diseases can be a problem if you don't clean them out before you start planting in them. And don't forget to check in on those things that you planted in the autumn, like your garlic, your spring bulbs and things like that. Make sure you check they're okay, make sure they haven't rotted, make sure they're growing away happily. Don't skip this step. All right, garlic, how are we doing? Hang on in there, folks, it will soon be spring. It's just around the corner. Now this one I think is overlooked by quite a lot of gardeners. Obviously it doesn't rain inside a greenhouse or a polytunnel, which can be a bit of a problem because the soil can dry out, especially in the winter. We're not really going to be giving them much water, and I've not watered in here most of the winter, in fact, and the soil is quite dry. You know, it's bone dry actually in some areas, and this can be a problem later on when I come to planting things in here. Now what happens is when soil dries out too much, it becomes aquaphobic and it struggles to absorb moisture. I'll water the surface of the soil and it won't soak in straight away, it'll just run off, and that can be quite a big problem in the spring. When I plant the cucumbers, I water it and the soil just doesn't absorb any moisture, and then the cucumber plant will then wilt because it's not getting the moisture, and it's just going to cause lots of problems. Not only will it be a problem for the plants when I put them in here, but it'll also be a problem for the microbial life in there as well. With no moisture in there, there's no beneficial microbes that can grow in there, so soil health will reduce as well. You know, you need some good microbial life in the soil to keep it healthy. But also the worms as well. Worms can't survive when the soil is bone dry. So all this organic matter that's on the top, you know, you've got some leaves here from last year's plants. Because the soil's dry, nothing's been able to break them down. So you want your soil to be nice and moist through the entire winter, really. I mean, I'll hold my hand up and say I've neglected these beds for the last few months and I haven't watered them. But February, great month for getting this done. I would say it's very important actually. If you've got a greenhouse or a polytunnel and you've not been in there to water your beds, you know, go in there and give them a splash of water every other week up until you planting them in the spring. It will really revitalise the soil and bring it back to life again. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to give it a good soaking, and then in another week or two I'll come in here again and give it another good soaking just to keep that soil nice and moist. You really do want nice moist soil before you go into the growing season. So that's my next thing. Now, if you're growing potatoes this year, February is a great month to start chitting your potatoes. This basically means just letting them produce sprouts before you plant them. This can give you a few weeks head start as opposed to not letting them chit. And you want to let the sprouts grow to around 1/2 inch to 1 inch long, no more than that really, and then plant them. And this is usually done about 4 to 6 weeks before you plant them. I'm going to be planting my potatoes around the back end of March, so February is when I'm going to start chitting them. All you need to do is lay them out in a tray and leave them somewhere not in direct sunlight but still with some natural light, and somewhere that's cool but not in contact with frost. So a windowsill at home that isn't south facing, you know, that just gets a little bit of natural light is ideal, but make sure they're away from a hot radiator. And yeah, let them chit before you plant them. This is a good way to get a head start on the growing season, and make sure you're ahead of the game really and get a head start over anyone else that hasn't chitted their potatoes. So yeah, get that done in February if you're going to be growing potatoes this year. I'm definitely going to be growing potatoes this year because they're one of my favourite, and I'm growing kestrel. That's what I've got here. I saved these from last year actually, and they're already starting to produce sprouts. Now this next one might sound a little bit cliche because you've probably heard it quite a lot, and it's quite an obvious one actually, to be honest, but I think it's very, very important before we go into into the growing season, because you don't want to be doing this whilst everything else is going on in your garden. Whilst plants are growing and you're looking after them, and you're even harvesting some crops as well, and you're having to combat pests, disease, weeds, everything. You don't want to be doing this job during those months. And that's just giving your garden or your allotment a good tidy up. Now, it might sound like a very simple thing when you think about it at first, but actually this is something you don't want to be doing during the growing season when everything else is going on. You want to be doing this before the growing season. Give your garden a good tidy up. Clear everything out the paths and make sure everything's just neat and tidy and everything is where it needs to be before things get busy. Give your shed a good tidy. If your shed's all messy and things are all over the place, don't put that job off now. Get it done before the growing season starts. Same with your greenhouse or your polytunnel. If it's a bit messy in there, just give it a good tidy up. Because if you got a nice clean slate before the season starts and everything's where it needs to be, it's just going to be less stressful later on. You know, there's going to be enough going on later on. You don't need the added stress of having to tidy up later when it's already busy. Now, whilst your perennial fruits might not be growing yet because they're still in dormancy, you can do things now to feed them later. You can top dress the soil with things such as growmore, bloodfish and bone, sulfate of potash, and chicken manure pellets as well. You can top dress them with these to give them a good nutrient boost later on. Sulfate of potash is really good for fruiting plants, apple trees, blueberries, strawberry plants. They'll benefit from sulfate of potash because there's got the nutrients in there that are good for fruit development. So I've done this a lot of years where I've put some sulfate of potash around fruit trees and stuff and my strawberry plants, and it's given them a good boost. So you can do this in the month of February even though those plants are still dormant. So there we have it. Those are the things which I recommend doing in the month of February to get ahead of the game really and get a head start on the growing season. If you put even just a few of these things in place, I'm not saying you have to do all of them. Some of these are just suggestions, but by doing these things, you greatly increase your chances of having a successful growing season. It's all about being prepared really with gardening. The more prepared you are, the more chances you have of success. So that's all for now guys. Happy growing, happy planting. I will see you in the next one.